I think we're live. Hello, friends. Hello, Renegades. This is Teri here. That was a really awesome panel. If you weren't able to catch it, over on the Gen Con main stage and hosted here on the Renegade Twitch channel was just the Vampire Rivals panel. And oh my gosh, I'm so excited for that game. But we're painting miniatures today. We're going to be doing something a little bit different than I've done in the past. Usually painting is an additive process, but today we are doing battle damage on Cyclopsis. I want to shout out the folks who are saying hello in chat. C10-108, Patty, K-Weeb, Red Shade 1237, Coffee and Creatures, great name, Garand, oh, that's a great name too, Unisaur, holy smokes, a lot of you are here. I am so very glad to have you here in chat. Victoria is also in chat. She'll be saying hi, wearing the Renegade mod crown. But I'll be hanging out here. We're gonna be getting painting on. I'm really excited for this. So, because this is a really fun one for me. I've been really excited to show you some of the fun things you can do with Cyclopsis. This is a big model. This is from Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid. Ooh, there's the box. Oops. There we are. Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid. This is the Cyclopsis Deluxe model. So it's actually pretty huge. I'm going to move it up to my face count. Here, you can see it. To scale, it's a big miniature. I always like to say that big miniatures are so much fun to work with. They're really easy to get started on when you're painting, just because the surfaces are big, the details aren't so tiny that you're like fighting the model. And this one's really fun because you can be a little more creative. Big models let you play a little more, and so we're going to be doing battle damage today. And battle damage is kind of a thing you can come at with two directions. And I'm gonna show you a few techniques today to work with that. So the first thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you some conversion techniques. Conversion is a term used in miniature war games, and I'm really excited to kind of get into it because it can be really intimidating when you are modifying your miniature, especially one that you bought, you paid for. It can feel like it's something that you're wrecking it. It's so easy to feel like you're wrecking it. But the joy of doing it on this mini in particular is that the art on the box, the miniature itself is shown to be battle damage. Now the miniature comes pristine, so it's nice smooth surfaces all around, but we're going to start taking tools to it to make it look battle damage. There are many ways to do battle damage. There are painting techniques to do it, and then there are conversion techniques to do it. And we're going to cover both today. So if you have any questions at all, I see the chat is pretty, it's going. There's a lot going on. Throw a big word question in there. I'll try to catch it on stream here and get your answers. If you have any questions about painting at all. This is about Cyclopsis, but if you're just tuning in to hang out, you're looking for some advice, techniques, what brushes are great, what paints work, I'm happy to talk about that while I take some clippers and other tools to this miniature. Now, before we get started, I do want to talk about safety. Safety is super important. These are sharps. I'll be using a variety of tools here. So I've got a set of clippers here that I'm looking at using. This is a model, like mold line cleaner. Some miniature companies will sell them. You can find them from like companies that produce hobby supplies. Some have handles. This one's kind of like a pocket size one. It's dull, but it has a nice sharp, like a 90-degree edge, and it's solid, so you can actually scrape at a miniature with it and get some really great results. I'm also going to be using one of these. This is a pin vise. If you have done anything with, say, like Space Marine type of miniatures where the guns don't have holes in the front of them and you've got to drill them out, this is the sort of thing you can use for that. And it's kind of like a small hand drill. So we'll be using that as well. And I have, though I might not be pulling it out too much, an X-Acto knife. You can use an X-Acto knife. Again, this is extremely sharp. Of all these tools, this is the one that is kind of can do the most damage quickly. And so being very careful with these tools is super important. Finally, I've got some files here as well. So I'll be using a variety of tools. I'll show you little techniques on using each one of them. But again, safety first. You want to make sure you're nice and careful. Now, there are a few questions already talking about paint. I will absolutely start getting to that. I'll talk about it through as we go. But in terms of paint and primer, I have like personal opinions, but generally I like to use whatever is available at my local hobby store. And that's just because it's accessible. So if I want to get that same color again, it's available. That person stocks it. It's not something that's kind of like hard to get. You have to find it on the internet again. So those brands are usually the ones I recommend, just because typically things like weather and altitude and humidity can affect different paints, and they work in different ways in different regions. So whatever's at the hobby store usually works well where you are regionally. So I'm going to start taking my clippers to this. Now, with Cyclopsis, I'm going to show you right here. With the art, on the side of the art, there is a pristine Cyclopsis, and then on the front art, there is a battle damage one. So I'm going to show you this pristine Cyclopsis here. Nothing happening on them so far. It's pretty smooth sailing. Nice clean surfaces. Easy to paint. If you're looking for something just to start with, white primer, pick a few details out in red. Great. But this is one I kind of took some of these tools to earlier. So you can kind of see clipper marks and a little bit of abrasions there. I put a little bit of wash here so you can pick it up a little more on camera. This is what it looks like with a little bit of paint. So it kind of captures that battle-worn look. And that's what we're going with today. So I'm going to get on, let's see here. So I'm going to get at this plastic with my clippers. It is a type of ABS plastic with the scale of miniatures. Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid uses a beefier scale as a whole. The Rangers are quite a bit bigger. I have a nasty knight sitting here. So this is the stature of like a standard miniature in this game. Again, quite large. And what that means is because the scale is bigger, you still have the details in there, but you also have kind of indestructible models in a sense. Like you can drop them, they can get knocked off the table by a cat, and you don't have to worry about them chipping or breaking or doing any of those things. As a miniature wargamer myself, that's the heartbreaking part of painting up your minis and putting that time into them and then painting them a second time after they've fallen to the ground and chipped is not as fun as the first time. So we're going to start clipping at it. What I'm doing here is I'm trying to think of where the first points of contact would be and where the weakest points of material would break. So that's typically the edges and typically the corners. On the flat surfaces, what you're looking at doing in terms of replicating battle damage is abrasions. Things that nick up that even smooth surface is really what will give you that battle damage look. So I'm taking my clippers first and I'm cutting these little triangles in. Nice and safe. Again, nothing too crazy or hard. This is all we're doing. You don't have to have all of these tools to replicate this result, but I'm just giving it a little bit of edge there. And you can see the difference on the two sides here. On this corner, I've got these nicked edges. I'm just going at it here. Over here, I might do a big gash there and a big gash here. Happy little gash here. Maybe the happy little gash has a lady friend here. It seems fun. There we go. We got nice nicks, good surface abrasion there. I'm not being like very careful or deliberate about the placement. I'm looking at it thinking, okay, what would make sense? But I'm not like trying to place them perfectly. I'm trying to keep them like evenly spaced or anything. The randomness of it is kind of what helps that battle damage look. So there you go. Boom. In there and in there. And I'm going to clip around here. In terms of miniature paints, I wanted to talk a little bit about getting paints that are formulated for miniatures. If you're starting out, that's always a good place to start. You do want to prime your miniatures first. Before you even get to the priming stage, give your miniatures a wash. The way that miniatures are made and manufactured, their materials usually injected into a mold, and that mold is coated with something that helps the miniature come out afterwards, which is good if you want a nice miniature that has good fidelity in the details. But it's kind of bad if you want paint to stick to a release agent, essentially, that is on your miniature, because it won't. So giving it a wash, just a little bit of dish soap, warm water. You don't need anything fancy. Give them a wash. Go over it with like a soft toothbrush or a little sponge. Get that release agent off. It's always a good idea. Let it dry. Then you can put your primer on. Primer helps the paint adhere to the plastic. It's just a nice coat, and that primer step can also help, give you a base coat color that you can either work up from or work through. If you're looking for bright, vibrant colors to put on the miniature, white is a great primer color. If you're looking for something that's easy to work with, black is always an easy color, because even if you can't get your brush into all the little nooks and crannies perfectly, that's usually where the shadows are, so it's a lot more forgiving as a primer color. And a lot of people just split the middle and will go with a gray, and if they know that they're gonna be painting in shadows, they'll just put a dark wash on top of that gray. Or if they know they're gonna bring the colors up, they can start building those up on the gray, and it's a lot easier to build it up on the gray than it is on black, especially colors that are super vibrant and neon, like those of the Rangers, except the black one. Let's see here. What are we have? Again, any questions, any comments, feel free to throw them in chat. If you are a miniature painter, you're joining us from Gen Con today, thank you. Thank you so much. I do encourage you to check out the Renegade Painters group on Facebook. It is a super supportive group. There are a lot of people in there who have painted for years. There are lots of people in there who are just starting in the hobby, and getting support, being able to share your works in progress, being able to get advice without feeling judged. It's such a big, important thing. It's something that when I started painting, I wish I could do. I didn't have that kind of supportive community. It's a great community to be a part of, and it's just a great place to learn new things as well from that entire community. Everyone is always learning. I'm always learning new things in there too, and so it's a fantastic community. I highly recommend you join there. So right now I'm taking my clippers and I'm just digging some damage into these beautiful smooth shoulder pads here. Again, I don't want you to feel like this is something that is scary. And it can be. It can feel super scary to do. You bought this model and you're gonna essentially dig and damage that surface. But when you know that's the outcome you really want, it feels empowering to do that. And that's something that will get you more comfortable with the idea of converting in the future. A lot of the people in the Renegade Painters community have done things like swapped weapons on some of the Rangers, which is really cool, really fun to see. But getting comfortable enough to start cutting up your miniatures, it takes a while to get there. You have to be comfortable. You have to get to a point where you're feeling okay with the tools. You're feeling okay with the process. So here is where we are on this. I'm just scratching up the surface here with this edge. Again, I'm being very careful. I'm not trying to use so much force that if it slips, I could hurt myself. I tend to also choke up on my tools a little bit. It gives me a little more control over the sharp areas of it, and I'm also not exposed. Like, my hands are not exposed. So I'm stabilizing this miniature with one hand, well away from where I'm actually putting the battle damage on. Super, super important. All right, so someone asked, Grund, I've been having trouble figuring out the difference between a wash and a shade. What are the differences? Okay, There are, functionally, I use the term kind of interchangeably. A wash, a shade. Sometimes people will use the term glaze in there. Like, from a formulation standpoint, they're relatively similar because they're all just another word for a really thin paint or a really thin pigment. Shades are, I think, came into miniature parlance because people were looking for a way to create the illusion of shadow. When you paint miniatures, what you're doing on top of like adding base colors is the way you make them stand out on the surface of the table is by painting the illusion of light and shadow on the miniature. You recreate that. You're creating that this fakeness. And so maybe a company or two might have marketed a product called a shade to indicate that this particular product, this thinned down pigment, is used to create shadows. There are other companies out there. I have products that are like basically interchangeable. So Citadel will make a product called a shade. It works in that way. Army Painter creates these bottled quick shades. Same deal. The idea of a wash is that I use that term because I make them myself. I'll just take some paint, I'll thin it with water. I might add like a drop of dish soap in there, just tiny edge bit, just to break the surface tension of the water. And that's all I'm doing, so that the paint and pigment and water runs into the cracks and crevices. You can do that. It's functionally the same thing. Some people also use washes to apply a thin layer of color on top of a shaded area. So if you're getting into painting and you're like, okay, what's an easy way to paint colors and not like try to recreate this idea of light and color with like layers upon layers of like solid paint. One way a lot of people have done it is by doing what's called sketch style. And instead of painting the colors onto the miniatures to start with from a base and then highlighting those colors and shading those colors individually, what they'll do is they'll paint the miniature in black and white, with the white being the highlights of the model and the black areas being shaded areas of the model. And what that does is it creates like this canvas. And then when you put a very thin layer of pigment, i.e. a wash, and you apply that to the area that has shaded, that color itself will look lighter in the highlights and darker in the shadowed areas that you've painted on. So a lot of people use that term to describe that. They'll also say glaze. It might be a thinner version of a wash when they're glazing in that same style, just to blend the colors together. But really, when I use that term and when I hear it functionally, what they're referring to is referencing whether it's a bottled product or a made formulated product on your palette that you've like added water to just like thin it down. That's what the implication is. Do I use flow improver when I paint? That's a good question. I have what's called a retarder. It helps the paint not dry out so quickly. If I'm using techniques where I need to work with wet paint, like I'm blending wet on wet, I've pulled it out in the past when it's like particularly dry, like in the winter when my heaters are running. Like that's oftentimes when I will actually pull in the retarder or flow improver. I don't tend to buy paints that require flow improvers. If I'm using an airbrush, for example, or I'm using paints that aren't necessarily formulated for miniature painting, I might use something like that. I have a whole bunch of artist supplies. When I got into miniature painting, a lot of my supplies early on were all from the hobby store. And then when I started experimenting with stuff from the fine arts areas of the stores and that sort of thing, things like flow improver, things like retarder, those all have places. But I don't think, if you're starting out, I wouldn't necessarily say that you need all that stuff. That's just extra stuff. If you're playing with additional techniques that recommend it, that's when you start picking up those extra things. I'm a big proponent of use what you have. The best paint you have to put on your miniature is the stuff you've got. If you've got a selection of paints, you can make it work. Usually, if you've got a good collection of paints, good base paints that can be used in multiple ways, whether that's base coating, dry brushing, washing. You can take a good single paint and use it in multiple ways. That will give you more money and free you up to buy more models, which I'm a big fan of. Generally, just as an approach, I'd rather spend my hobby dollars on new toys than have to feel like I have to buy all this extra stuff to make things work. But you know, if you're looking out and you're growing as a painter and you find a technique that you're like, oh, that looks neat, that looks like a cool effect I'd like to try, and they say use this, you can try it. But also be aware of like your climate. Climate is a huge thing when it comes to painting. I paint, my home is surrounded by like lakes. The city I live in is surrounded by lakes. You got Great Lakes on one side, another lake here, and another lake there. It's a very humid area, especially in the summer. It's super humid. I find that I don't necessarily need the same products for like keeping my paint from drying as fast in those areas. Also means that my primer takes longer to dry, which is kind of a pain. But be conscious of your climate too. If someone is creating techniques and tutorials where they're suggesting, you know, they're using like a flow improver or a retarder, you know, check out where they're at. Like, you can try it without it first. If it doesn't quite work, maybe try getting that extra product if you really want to go at it. Someone's asking about primed a few miniature, Wiffle Master. I primed a few miniatures outside and end up with a powdery texture. I was able to scrub off the powdery part, but there's still a good amount of primer on the miniature. It's just a grainy texture. Should I strip over and prime better next time? Oh, so there's a couple reasons why dusting happens. It's kind of a pain. Sometimes it's just old primer. Like if I've got the primer can that's sat for a long time, I hadn't shake it up very well, and I've used it to the bottom, and I'm at the point where I'm using the stuff that is settled at the bottom of that can, and I wasn't shaking it throughout the whole life of that can. Sometimes it gets dusty. Sometimes it gets dusty because the humidity, the paint, when you spray the can, you can actually feel, especially if you're using a canned primer, a rattle can primer, the can gets cold. So the paint can will actually get colder as you spray it. You can feel it in your hands. And if you're priming at a point where it's really humid, that cold transfers to the model and it immediately captures water in the air because of condensation. So it actually makes that weird texture as well, which is just a pain. In terms of stripping, I would recommend before you strip, get yourself a bottle of isopropyl alcohol. I don't know how available, I don't know how available it is. So right now I'm actually just pulling this clipped area off using my clippers as if they're tweezers. You know, getting the dings in there. I'm going to move to a different tool. But as I was saying, in terms of you know, being mindful of the climate, you know, if you're going to try to strip your model, stripping is like the last option. It is the nuclear option of miniatures. I try to keep myself from going there if I can. If it's the texture that's not quite even, you can try taking like a little bit of isopropyl alcohol on a paper towel and wiping the miniature with that. Try to smooth it out first. The isopropyl alcohol actually melts the paint a little bit. It dissolves the paint. And then you can sometimes rub it smooth. If it's not too bad, or if it's just a little bit bubbled, you can usually rub it smooth. Especially if it's dusted, it's not terrible. If you're finding that if you have you overpriming is also like a huge issue. If you put way too much, way too thick, it gets this weird like ripple, almost like a wavy kind of like big smooth waves or bubbles they're quite flat, but there's a weird texture that sometimes comes of it. You know, you got to smooth that out, or you might have to strip if you've lost detail. So those are the, like, that's what I recommend first. If you're looking to strip your models, especially with this, like Power Rangers Heroes of Grid miniatures, they are quite resilient. You can strip them with Simple Green is often the easiest to go to. I soak mine in like a little thing of Simple Green overnight, and then I'll put it into a different container. Something like this might be a little harder, but like a regular miniature, like a Ranger size miniature, if you put it in a little mason jar, soak it in Simple Green overnight, and then dump out that Simple Green. You can reuse it. You can reuse it, and pour in isopropyl alcohol, rubbing alcohol, and give that a shake. The paint just falls away, so it's really nice for that as well. Let's have a look here. Do I suggest a different primer to use for lead and pewter models as opposed to plastic ones? Ooh, good question. I don't. So I have never used like a special primer for miniatures that aren't plastic. All of Renegade's miniatures are plastic, so it's a lot easier. But if you're like dealing with miniatures, like let's say you're playing in the role-playing World of the Wardlings, which is a role-playing game that Renegade just released. It's really delightful, 5th edition compatible. So all of those miniatures and monsters you've got in other campaigns you want to bring in or you want to strip down, those miniatures would be ones that I would just prime, but it's the finishing coats that I'm trying to use to protect the paint job on them. So I've often, for non-plastic miniatures, I'll put on a protective coat of gloss, maybe 2, if I know the miniature is like kind of scratch. And then I'll put on a dull coat after that just to bring all that shine down. If you like shiny miniatures, leave it shiny, by all means. But I'm someone who likes the finish on miniatures to be rather flat and matte. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking this mold line cleaning tool, and I'm just coming in here and scratching up these areas. That's all I'm doing. So where I was like, doing some scratches with my clippers, I can't kind of take out these wedge bits here in the shoulder pad. Let me see if I can adjust this camera a little bit. It's a little rough to see perfectly. Let's have a look here. But let's adjust this a little bit more. Okay, so there we have the plastic and those little wedge bits. That's not something you can really replicate with a tool like this. You can try it with an X-Acto knife. To me, that's dangerous, sketchy. This thing is made to take little chunks of plastic off, so I'll use that. And so this is all I'm doing. So I'm going to take this tool. I'm just going to scratch up areas in here, so you can kind of see right there. I'm just taking some big scratches right in here. Nice and easy. It's nothing too crazy. This doesn't have to be scary. If you're painting miniatures like this is a great technique if you want to battle damage your Megazord miniature as well. Great technique for this sort of stuff, because what you're doing is you're essentially creating bits that you can then paint on afterwards. I like to think of miniature painting as paint by number. So where I see detail, I paint that detail. It's a lot easier to paint on details that are on the miniature sculpted into the plastic than it is to try to freehand it. That's the term to describe like when you're creating say designs that aren't sculpted on a miniature and you're painting those on. That's not something I'm necessarily as comfortable doing. I'm not someone who likes to sketch on my miniature. I'm not artistically inclined in that way at all. So for me, it's easier to paint the details that are already on the miniature. So taking a little bit of time to convert the battle damage onto the miniature makes more sense to my brain as I'm painting the miniature, and it makes more sense to me when I've got to figure out how I'm going to actually like approach a miniature. Having that battle damage on there, it's just like, hey, paint me different. It's like a little line that says, hey, I'm special. This area here, this is a crack. This is a battle scar. This is battle damage. So that's all I'm doing, is I'm just creating that surface, that abrasive surface of battle damage onto the miniature. So that's all I'm using this tool for. Again, it's a nice tool because it's not sharp. Like I can actually like handle it. If I like hit my hand with it, like, it'll hurt, but I probably won't hurt myself badly, especially with this plastic. It's soft enough to be malleable for this purpose. And so it's kind of nice like that. So I'm just, you know, throwing on some scratches here and there. Again, not being too focused. I like to bring my scratches across these edges again, as I said, where the material fatigue, if you will, on Cyclopsis would probably be where that metal is thinnest, least supportive, and then the abrasion marks would probably show up on the big flatter areas, and that's what I'm replicating here. You can also do it with files, so this is a really fun one for me. If there are bits that you want to really abrade, like if you want to take this hard edge off of it, make it look like it's really taken a serious beating, I can just take this file up here and I'll just work that file across the miniature. Again, sharp pointy edge, be very careful, but it helps take the pristine off of the miniature. Sharp, clean edges on like machinery, on robots, giant robots, that pristineness is actually the first thing to go when it's getting battle damaged. Those are the things that get nicked, so those things that get buffed at. Those are the things that you really that really just make it you know, make it feel like it's worn in. So taking a little bit of a file to these areas, smoothing out those nice clean edges on the corners here. So up here, where this nice edge, it's nice and clean here, where that edge lives, I'm gonna just go and smooth that out a little bit in a very conspicuous area. So it's like clean edge, clean edge, clean edge, not clean edge. Like something hit this area right here. That's the approach I'm taking with the file. Let's have a look here. Splice 1101. Can I paint all your minis? I cannot. I'm sorry, but I can't paint all of my minis for me. Like a miniature junkie, I myself have not gotten to all my miniatures, so I wish I could. If I could say yes, it means I've painted all of my miniatures, which I haven't. I wish I could. Aaron Tex 143. Yeah, interesting philosophical approach to battle arms. Thank you. I think that there's a lot of ways to approach miniature painting as a whole. A hobby as a whole, there are always different techniques, there are always different ways, there are always evolutions in the process. For me, I'm both a lazy painter and I'm a tabletop painter. My focus is to get miniatures done, get them on the tabletop looking great, not being mad if someone were to drop them, hit it on the floor. So that's the range of like the level of painting I want to get my mini to. It looks good, but I won't be mad if someone drops it and chips it and I have to touch stuff up. Like that's the personal level for me where I paint. All right. What's my miniature backlog? Oh my gosh. I don't think I can say. I have so many miniatures. That's a good question. I have so many miniatures. I play a lot of games with miniatures. I have so many Power Rangers I haven't even got to yet. Like, I feel bad because there's so many great painters in the Renegade Painters group who have done so many amazing paint jobs. And I'm like, you know what? I only really need this one Red Ranger. I don't need another right now. I don't need to paint the alt sculpts, as it were, because I've already got this red, Ranger, Jason Lee Scott. I don't need the second alt sculpt. I'm fine. I don't need the extra Rita. I've painted my Rita already. It's okay. So it's nice for me to have those miniatures. It makes me feel good as a miniature painter where I'm like, one day, it's aspirational, one day. But yeah, no, my alt Rita is still sitting on my to-do project shelf. She's primed. I've got her primed. She's good to go. And I've got, I have a folder of reference art that I'm like, oh, that's pretty. I'll add it to my little folder so that when I get to painting her, I I have the reference image of like, okay, this is kind of what I want it to look like. And I think sometimes that might be a little bit aspirational, but it's a thing. It's a for real thing. Ooh, Gurren just finished priming all of their Power Rangers Heroes of Grid minis. Ooh, that's gonna be so much fun. I loved painting my putties though. Like, it's funny because like of all the things that I have absolutely not needed to paint anymore, putties. I love painting them. They paint so fast. They feel so satisfying to paint because you can get through tons of them so quickly. And so I have all of my putties done. So that's got to count for something, right? All right, here. So I've got the filing done. I'm going to do some pock marking as well. So like, let's say poor Cyclopsis has gotten some blaster damage in. Having like a little point of impact, indents, dents, that sort of thing. That's what this pin vise will really help kind of emulate. If you're looking for that sort of thing, you don't have to drill so super deep, and all you're looking is to blade a little circle or kind of a marcation of where that kind of blaster hit would have gone full impact into. Again, I'm trying to focus where the most damage would be hit first, where they're targeting. Shoulders are super easy, nice and safe. So I'm going to just push and turn. That's all that's all we're looking at doing. And I'm not trying to apply a ton of pressure. I'm going to let the tool do a lot of the work for me. When it comes to sharps in general, I highly recommend you let the tool do the work for you. Don't get into trying to force the tool to do the job. If it's not working, you might need a new drill bit on your pin vise. You might need a new blade in your X-Acto knife. Maybe your file's all worn down. Like, you don't need to do the work. The tool is meant for this, and the material is soft enough that if you're finding that you're like pushing really hard, you're getting strained, it's time to switch it up. So there's the pock mark right there. Pretty easy, pretty straightforward, really easy to do. So that's one easy approach to doing some battle damage. Doing a few of those. Again, what we're doing is, it feels like we're wrecking miniatures, and kind of we're doing destructive conversion. I like to call it destructive conversion, because that's what we're emulating on the miniature. But at the same time, you're also like personalizing it. You're giving it character, and that's always fun. It's patina. Yes, it's patina. So I've gone through all my tools. I've got this X-Acto knife here. I'm not going to use it. I don't want you to feel like you need to use the sharpest thing. This is something that you can do to do a lot of the techniques I've done, the scratches, the abrasions. But I don't think that if you're not comfortable with using one of these, if you haven't used them in the past just comfortably, you know how the weight works. It's kind of like using paintbrushes, where you kind of get to know your paintbrush a little bit, knowing what you can ask of it, knowing what it's not so strong at, where you might reach for a different brush. That's what this tool kind of is. You need to get to know it first. You need to show it respect. I'm going to respect my X-Acto blade today. I'm not going to use it on this miniature. I think I've done enough damage without it anyways. And yeah. Oh, Orange Jathrili, I'm going to assume it's Jelly, is asking, are these minis for playing a game? Yes! This is Cyclopsis for Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid. This is a miniature board game designed by Jonathan Ying. You might know some of his other miniature games he's designed for other companies, like, say, Star Wars Imperial Assault. He's also designed this great little card game called Bargain Quest, which is really fun. So he's got the cred in the miniature game design space. But this Cyclopsis, especially when it comes to gameplay, it's not just a miniature in the box. It actually has a whole like card set. When you fight it, you lay out a card that looks like Cyclopsis. You have to defeat each like area, like his arm. You have to take out his arm sword. You have to take out his head. You have to do all of these things. Really fun. I love it. Orange Jelly. Okay, perfect. Yes. So yes, this is for Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid. I'm a huge fan of the game. If you're kind of looking for what the feel of the game is, it's a cooperative game. It's a tower defense game. It's based on the Power Rangers universe, so you will play as Power Rangers against creatures like Cyclopsis over here. Big boy. Question, how do I clean my miniatures after they are primed? Cleaning your miniatures after if the primer is sticking, you don't need to. Like, if the primer is adhering well to the miniature, don't bother. If you're finding that the primer is not adhering well, that's when you want to go back in, maybe give it a rub just to see what's coming off of it, and then you can come back into it, warm soapy dishwater, give it a wash, try to get that mold release off the miniature. All right, here. I'm thinking about painting Rita's makeup on her mini. What brush do you, what brush do you recognize for that fine of a detail? Ooh, there's a number of brushes. If you're going to like your hobby store, Army Painter makes this like masterclass brush. It's Kolinsky. It's made out of Kolinsky sable hair, and if you're unfamiliar, there are different fibers for brushes, and Kolinsky sable is like a kind of weasel, but they hand tie those brushes. They're more expensive, but they hold a really nice point, and because they're natural fiber as opposed to synthetic, they actually hold moisture as well. And what that does is it gives you a little bit of longer time for it, and that moisture holds the bristles together as well, so it keeps the point of the brush for a little bit longer too if you're doing details like that. If you're looking at painting makeup on Rita, I did a video where I painted Rita's face, and I also did Rebel Ranger Kimberly, her face as well, the Rebel Ranger Slayer, on the helmetless version. The things like eyes and makeup I showed how to do, so you can kind of replicate that. It doesn't need a super tiny brush. Again, these miniatures are a little bit bigger, so a little more forgiving, but that masterclass brush or the master brush from Army Painter's one, I'd reach for a lot. Basically, if it's a fine enough brush, like a 0 brush, size brush, watercolor brush, natural fiber from your art store, that would work really well as well. I have a number of them in my collection. I also have, if you really want to get like the Cadillac of miniature painting brushes, Winsor Newton makes watercolor brushes. They make them as fine as like a 00. So like the sizing is like super tiny, like 00 or 0/ number, like 5 or whatever, super tiny. Then it'll go to like a 00, then it'll go to a 0, which is slightly bigger, usually as much as I need for a miniature. And then it goes to like 1, 2. By the time you hit 2, that's usually where I'm reaching for a base coat brush. And for base coats, I'll take a synthetic. It works the same. And those bigger brushes are actually more expensive too, so there's that. Now, this is Cyclopsis. I did kind of the same treatment on this Cyclopsis that I did on the other one just now here on stream. But I did it last night, and then I primed them. So you can kind of see that battle damage on this miniature here. And you can kind of see on this side, so this area here, I put a wash on it just so that I could see where the battle damages were, what I wanted to focus on, what I wanted to paint. The nice thing about Cyclopsis is you can actually take a bottled wash, or you can take some black paint and thin it right down. We'll do both on this miniature. I'll show you how. And turn it into a wash and apply that. Even if it looks kind of weird and splotchy, that's okay, because that's kind of how the art looks on the box. It's a little bit like dirty and battle worn, and so that like unevenness is good for the result that you're looking for. Again, really easy miniature to make looking good, especially battle damage. If you're not looking for a perfect pristine look, I find that like doing things that are dirty, doing things that are battle worn, for me it's more fun to paint, but also it's a little less stressful than trying to make everything perfect. Yes, just take care of them after painting a session. What if after my priming a miniature says Aaron text 143, my miniature is tacky? Ugh, that's a pain. There are a lot of reasons why primer might get tacky on you, and what ends up happening oftentimes is that the primer didn't cure enough. It might have been too thick, so an underlayer is still kind of, it hasn't set completely, and it might have been, like, if it's too cold even. Sometimes if it's too cold, your primer won't cure correctly. It needs to be warm for the chemical reaction to turn this liquid of product into what is essentially a plastic. So that sometimes happens. It's really hard to deal with. I would take as much as I could, again, wet paper towel with some rubbing alcohol, isopropyl alcohol. Give it a rub, see if you can thin it down a little bit. Maybe it'll dry. If not, get rid of that primer that you used on that miniature if it's coming out tacky. Like do a test spray on some box or like another piece of plastic, like a margarine container lid or a coffee container lid. See if it dries the same. Or you can do the underside of the base as well. That works as a really great test zone for miniatures. And just try to suss out what the problem is. If it's not the primer can itself after you've done the test, it might be that it just went on too thick and it didn't quite set. So try to thin it out. If not, you might have to strip. Hello, Eduardo from Brazil. Thank you so much for loving the tutorials. I'm so glad. If there's questions, again, I'm happy to answer them. So, miniature, battle damage, primer on top. That's all I've done. I did something a little bit earlier on his leg, too. What I did was, before I primed this miniature white, I primed this miniature, this leg specifically, black. And then I dry brushed some metal on. Some metal paint, some metallic silver paint. Really generic, nothing crazy. All I was trying to do was create the illusion of metal underneath this paint coat of white. And then I took some hairspray. So that's my hairspray here. This is like cheap. It was on sale at the drugstore. Nothing fancy. And I sprayed a little bit of it on his leg. I'm not going to spray it right now. A, because this miniature's already primed. I don't need to do this application. Also, it'll make a super loud noise. If you're listening on headphones, you will hate me for it. So not happening. But while the hairspray was wet, I sprinkled, this is salt. This is just table salt. Regular stuff you find in like your salt shakers. I took a pinch of that and I sprinkled it on and I got this this texture. Why did I do that? Because after I sprinkled the salt on, I let that dry. It dries really quick. Hairspray dries pretty quick. It's warm, it's summer, so it'll dry even faster. But I did that so that afterwards I can come in with my mold cleaning tool. It could be anything. It could be the edge of a butter knife. And I can actually scrape this salt off. And what I am left with is battle damage as if it's been burned, as if it's been mottled, as if it's been like damaged up. So I'm just rubbing the salt off right now. And I'll adjust the zoom on this a little bit better if you need to see it in better. Let me know in chat. So what I'm doing is I'm just scratching it right off here. You can use your fingernail, you can use a butter knife, you can use whatever. And because I primed over it with white after the salt's dried, by taking off the salt, it exposes that underlayer of paint. And then I get battle damage. This is a really easy one to do. You can, the hardest part of this technique is keeping the salt where you want it. And that's it. If you just kind of want this burned texture everywhere, great. This is even better. It's like you can do the whole miniature really fast. Everything done well enough is battle damage. Yes! Perfect. So this is just a nice straightforward thing. I rub the salt off. If you take off a little bit of the paint as you scrape it down, it's just more battle damage. It's great. Nice and easy. Good to go. And I do want to try to take off all the salt on the model as possible. Otherwise, it just kind of just looks like there's like weird texture on the miniature as I paint on in subsequent layers. But that will give me a nice undercoat for damage. That's what that leg looks like. Salt, hairspray. Super easy, super fun. And again, it's not crazy. This is like, when it comes to hobby supplies, salt and hairspray are like among the cheapest hobby supplies, and you get a great result from them. So I'm a fan of like digging through my kitchen, seeing what I can use in there to add character to my miniatures. Baking soda works really great if you're looking for like texture on a base. Put some super glue and some baking soda, you're good to go. It gives you nice kind of like dirt rubbly texture, but it's not like sand. And it cures immediately because the baking soda cures the super glue like that. Just keep your fingers away from it because it does get pretty warm. The chemical reaction of super glue gets really warm quick, but really fun to play with those kitchen-y kind of things when it comes to the hobby. Weird textures, additional character. Yeah, if you like the weird texture, totally. It can be part of the model. It's like converting. You can totally do that. So I'm gonna clear off all this excess like grub off of my surface here, and I'm gonna pull out my paints, and we're gonna get to painting this miniature now. I am going to be working on this miniature and another miniature all weekend over in the Renegade Game Studios Discord for the convention. I'll be posting works in progress as I like get it closer to finished. I'm doing selected areas right now just because we don't have so much time together, unfortunately, but I'll be posting works in progress as the weekend goes on throughout Gen Con Online. So you can paint along with me. You can share what you're working on in there. I'd love to see what you're doing. And yeah, it's going to be a fun one. So I've cleared off all the bits of gunk on my surface, and I'm going to get my tools ready to paint this up. So, basic tools, cup of water. Got my wet palette here, which is just an old chocolate container. You might know. That I got for Mother's Day with a wet paper towel underneath and a layer of parchment for my wet palette. For my dry palette, I have a fancy smancy coffee lid contain. Like here, you can use a margarine lid. You can use a tile, whatever. Just something dry if I want to do some dry brushing on. That paint goes there. It doesn't get wet on my wet palette. And my brushes and paints. So let's have a look here. Gurund. How would you go adding a full blaster hole through an extremity? I would use my pin vise. Honestly, I would use a pin vise, and if I'd start on a relatively small one based on the material I'm trying to do. You know, something that's reasonable. I would drill through that area, starting as small as just to make sure that the model is strong enough, like the fidelity of the model, there's material enough to do the full bigger drill. So once you do that pilot hole, if you want to make it bigger, you can always make it bigger, but you can't make it smaller. And if you're using a really big tool off the bat, it can get real squirrely on you if you don't have a pilot hole in place. So drill that pilot hole first. Oh, Molly loves my paint palettes. I'm lazy. I'm cheap. I like recycling. I'm not gonna lie. I do. This is my dry palette. I've used it on so many streams. You can see old paint on it. It's not gonna make a difference to once it's dry, it's just plastic and it's not gonna peel off and contaminate any other paint. So I might as well just reuse just to reduce as well. We are gonna have to get me a real painting palette. Hunter's Entertainment. Thank you so much. Hunter's Entertainment is one of Renegade's partners, beloved partner. They're running live plays all weekend long as well. Definitely check out their Twitch channel. They have to get me a real paint palette. I have a story about that, and it's probably why I try not to get myself fancy things. I had like a stay wet palette. This was like a palette I had purchased at my fancy art store, like a fine art store. It had a lid. It had like a special like cellulose sponge inside instead of paper towel. It had like, we had to buy special paper for it to go on top. Like it was a whole production. And I used it for quite some time. I carried it around with me. I liked it. I liked having something that had a lid, but also my chocolate box comes with a lid. I think I ended up really liking the chocolate box because it comes with chocolate inside. And if you have a better reply to that, like if you can tell me that there is a professional paint palette out there that has chocolate inside, I'll buy it. I'll buy it to just try it. But I'm a fan of food, so I'm easily bribed. And so it makes it easier for my family to get me gifts when it comes to what do I want? I want more chocolates. I'm using it. I'm gonna use the palette. So let's have some paints here. So I've got my brushes. I'm gonna talk you through a few of my brushes real quick just to give you an idea. So these are kind of my natural fiber brushes. This is that number 2 brush I mentioned from Winsor Newton. Again, you don't have to spend the money on it. More often than not, I'll reach for a synthetic brush if I want a base coat, something like this. So here you go. I'll give you a quick comparison. This is a Winsor Newton brush. It's made from weasel tail hair, hand-tied in England, I guess, by a company that used to make brushes for Queen Victoria. This is an Artist Loft brush I bought at Michael's in a pack of 20 with other brushes. Thought I reach for as much for my base coats. This one cost like, I think it was like with the coupon, like $7 with like 19 other brushes. This one cost like more than I'm willing to admit publicly, but like over $25. It wasn't great. And to this day, I still reach for that synthetic brush at least as much than the other brush. So there you go. In terms of other brushes that I have, when it comes to the detail brushes, so this is a Raphael brush. This is like a watercolor brush, really fine point. It's a 0. This is all I usually use, reach out for the size, at least 0, when it comes to painting details. Look at the tip. It's a natural fiber brush. That's what I'll reach for. And, you know, same with this. This is like a miniature series brush I think this is by Broken Toad. Yeah. Same deal. When it comes to detail brushes, you pay a little bit more for them kind of at the smaller size than you will at the big size. But if you know you're only using them for that specific purpose, invest in one. Don't go crazy though. You don't feel like you have to have like this super set of amazing like miniature painting brushes to get stuff done, because I'm going to talk to you about that today. These are my workhorse brushes. This is actually a brush from a makeup company called Eyes Lips Face. They have a website called eyeslipsface.com. They sell this brush as, I don't know if you can read on stream, it says silicone glitter applicator. It's used to apply glitter makeup to a face. I use it for pulling paint out of bottles like this, so I don't have to get paint up into the ferrules of a brush. Nice and easy, spreads really nice. This is a small precision brush. I guess it's used for like filling in eyebrows. If I was the kind of person who like was worried about filling in my eyebrows, I use this as a smaller dry brush. Really great, really cheap. And this is a contour brush. It's like an eyeshadow brush. It's really big, bushy, soft, synthetic. This is my workhorse dry brush. It's like, you buy it at like Target, drugstores, Walmart for like $4, and it is so good. So there you go. Yeah, and those are my workhorse brushes. Those are the brushes that I reach for a lot and who do the most damage, do the most work for me, but also the ones that I do the most damage to. Dry brushing especially is very hard on your brushes, and so that is something that you kind of want to be mindful of when you're investing in your hobby tools, right? Like, you don't need to buy a super expensive dry brush, because really you're gonna throw it away. You're wrecking your brush as you do it. That's just the fate of it. So, cup of water here, wet palette here, dry palette here, some paper towel, got my brushes, got my paints handy. Let's get rolling. Let's see here. My favorite makeup company. They're a good makeup company. I'm not a paid influencer for them. Normally when I buy a bunch of brushes I need to load up on supplies, I'll buy like 6 of that contour brush because I know I'm going to use them. And then I'll buy like a couple things for myself, like this red lipstick, because, you know, I still like red lipstick. I'm going to put, this is Soft Body Black. It is a pre-bottled wash. It's a very dark, very intense wash in terms of like its pigmentation. It's much much thinner than some of the shades. It applies pretty thin, but it dries the way it applies. So I like it because of that. I'm going to add a pile of water to it. I'm going to thin it down more than I normally would. And so water next to that, and I'm just going to mix that together. And I'm going to start applying it onto the miniature. I'm applying this wash onto this miniature to let it sink into the crevices and cracks. So that's all I'm going to do. I am going to also grab my little synthetic here. I'm going to grab my small precision brush. So I'm going to wet it. I'm not going to be doing much dry brushing with this on a model this big, but I'm going to wet it because it's going to be like my cleanup sponge, like a mop. So 2 brushes. I'm just going to apply this wash. Ooh, it's pretty intense still. Onto the miniature. It will dry a little bit lighter, but it gives me a good sense of where it's going to settle and where it's going to, how it's applying onto the miniature. And I'm going to show you just where that battle damage is. You can see how it used to be pretty pristine and it's not. Now where I'm noticing the puddling and I don't want that puddling to happen, I'm going to come in with that wet precision brush. I'm going to dip it in my water here. And I'll move this over so you can see when I'm dipping. And dip it in my water here. And I'm going to just take the excess off. I'm going to just touch and it will pick up. I'm not sure if that's picking up. Let me know in chat. I'm just going to touch where the heaviest puddles are. And it's just going to pick them up like a mop and clean up so I don't get weird splotchiness and I have a little more control over where that wash is being applied. So I'm going to move it around a little bit on this model here, apply it where I want, give it a rinse, take off the excess water, and just pick up the excess wash with my wet brush. Nice and easy. Now, if you're trying to keep this, the brighter areas whiter, this is one way to help do that, help you control that wash a little bit. But also, I'm going to come in and with the places where I want that white to be super bright, those edge highlights, for example, right next to where the shadows are darkest, you can also add that highlight. It works really well. You can actually see it in the art on the box right here. So if you look on the box, where there is like the deep crevices on the scratches, there's like a really bright, like very thin line of white. We can recreate that on this miniature here. I'm also going to take a finer brush and I'm going to take that same wash to this model. And I'm going to paint into those cracks as well. So I'll give you a quick look at that. So on this side here, I'm going to add that wash and just reapply it with like precision application and just apply it into the cracks. I can exaggerate the cracks a little bit, extend them further with this wash. And the nice thing is, if it's not dark enough, I can always come in again with more wash afterwards. But I don't have to worry about cleanup. So add them in there. So, do I add ball bearings to my paint? To pots to aid in agitation, asks Aaron Tex. Oh, man, I'm going to come off as like some super no, I don't. I don't because I don't tend, like the paints that I use often don't require them. I also tend to find that paints that do require them have them in them already. I have a couple bottles that come with mixing beads in there because they settle really fast. A lot of the miniature paint I buy is just standard paint. It's not like a special paint. It's not like specially formatted for a single thing. I tend to get like these P3 paints, for example, or these game color paints from Vallejo. And a lot of the base paints generally from like Citadel, they don't require it. And because they just don't settle. There's enough emulsion in there. You give them a good shake. That's all they need. They don't settle the same way that some thinner paints might. I have some paint from, I'm trying to remember. I think it is, I think the paint label is, oh gosh, I wish I could remember. It's just a really thin paint. It comes out onto the palette really thin. It has, like, it spreads really quickly, like when you put it on your palette, it's not something that has a little bit of body or surface tension to it, because it's so thin that it comes with agitators in there. I don't find that I need them. I don't add paint into my, or water into my paint pots, so I'm not adjusting this formulation already. But if you're finding that you get weird settling, if you're finding that it's an issue, honestly, it's not as good an investment as like if you're looking at really getting into it. You can just like take bits of plastic sprues. A lot of if you're doing miniatures, a lot of companies will send you their bits of miniature on sprues. That's a good way to go. You can clip those up, throw them in your pots, give them a shake. I don't know if there are any miniature companies. Let me know, Aaron Tex, if you're using paint that you're finding has like that settling issue. But I normally don't find my paint settle, and usually if I give it a good shake, sometimes if I find that it's settled in a way that like there's really like you can see the pigment into the bottom of the pot, I'll just take the lid off and I'll like go at it with a little bit of like a coffee stir or like the back end of a brush and just scrape that stuff up and give that a stir. That tends to work a little bit better than agitators. I don't know. I find that they're expensive, and I find that they're not necessarily worth it for me. Army Painter paints, I've never found them to need agitators. I have really old, like 6-7-year-old Army Painter paints. I have, like, I don't know if you can tell, this is a nearly empty bottle of wash. I have a lot of older paints. I don't think they need them. They're quite, especially Army Painter formulation paints, they are quite thick to begin with. When they come out, they're much more like sour cream than they are skim milk. And I tend to use them a lot. I like them a lot for dry brushing too. And so that formulation, I find it's pretty stable. I don't see them settle as much. So I think that if you're finding it's a problem, get them later down the line. But I wouldn't necessarily think of like, oh, I bought all this new paint, I want it to stay fresh and good, I'll make sure, you know, this accessory is something I should invest in. It's not. You know, for the cost of that stuff, you could probably buy more paint, replacement paint, if you're finding it's an issue. But Army Painter is a very stable, very thick formulation. I've never found I've needed it. So here is that one area I did a big base wash on. I'm going to start putting in some extra details in here. So here we go. Let's just add them in right here. This is really fun. I'm going to be taking on Mega Goldar on the Gen Con main stage on Sunday. So if you're tuning in now, I do hope you join me for that on Sunday. It's going to be a real fun time. And if you're not like, if you haven't joined the Renegade Discord to stay up to date on what's coming up, what's happening, that's a good place to do it. You can go to renegadegamesstudios.com/Discord and you'll get the invite to our Discord right away. What do I think of Citadel paints? Oh my gosh, I have a collection of paints that is embarrassing. I have a lot of Citadel paints. I like them. I find that they work in triads. So Citadel paints, I think it's why they have such a huge range. So they're kind of formulated to be, you know, you have a base coat, you have a shade color, you have a highlight color. Like they work in threes. And so in some ways I find sometimes that if you're like not good at figuring out what's an easy highlight, how to formulate that stuff, they can be really good for that. I am the kind of person who likes to press my paints, who likes to stress my paints, who likes to drive different elements of my paint. So I'll mix my paints in different ways. Like one of the things that I loved doing that I've done a little bit on bulk in my Bulk and Skull pack for Power Rangers Fear of the Grid was his purple color. I mix for a highlight in that purple, I mix a little bit of the orange from Skull that I used into some white, and I mix that into the purple. to make a highlight color. And I find that that little detail to kind of bring a little bit of color into each kind of ties them together visually without being obvious. So it's just the tiniest little amount of orange to blend into that highlight. Now, I wouldn't normally think of doing that if I was thinking only in triads. And sometimes, like, those triads look really great if you're painting like 100 miniatures at a time. You've got a whole bunch of stuff where you've got to do a lot of them, and you've kind of got to have a system to get them all done. I've done that. I have painted thousands of points of Tau. I mean, if you look at my arms, you know, my tattoos are insane courage. For you old school players of Warhammer, you might know what that means. It's like a morale test roll outcome. And yeah, it works for those. And I think that that's kind of, there's a reason why they're formulated that way. It's because it's intended for painting humongous miniatures of paints. If you're like painting miniatures for your role-playing game, you're personalizing your Wardlings miniatures, you're painting individual Rangers for Power Rangers Heroes of the Grid, you know, that sort of thing, I don't necessarily think it's as necessary to have those paints. You might buy one paint, mix in some white, mix in some ivory, like play with it a little bit to make your own custom colors, because you don't need that consistency across every individual miniature where you just open up the bottle, you know it's going to be the same every one and they'll all look uniform. These are all characters in a sense. And so because you're painting individual characters, you can give them a little bit of uniqueness by mixing your colors. I do like them though. They're a good quality paint, and I think that they're formulated very well. I use Citadel Primer. I like their black a lot as primer. It's my go-to black primer always. I like their white. I found other primers can get dusty. I find that Citadel is probably one of the paint primers that are not, they don't get as dusty. I think it's probably because they're formulated for England and in Nottingham where they're headquartered. The temperatures are just a little bit cooler and it's just way more humid out there, and so it's a little more tolerant to humidity. Oh, do I thin my paints? I do. I thin my paints with water. I don't really thin them with much else because I don't necessarily find that I need to. I do also use a wet palette. Again, paper towel, baking parchment paper, and I find that works as well. What do I think of the contrast paints? I find that they're interesting. Honestly, I think that if you're new and you're really intimidated and contrast paint is the thing that's getting you into the hobby, fantastic. I'm so happy. For the amount of color I pull out of any single pot for a project, I'm more likely to buy a paint of theirs, a regular paint, and thin it down and do that sort of thing just because of the way I paint and the techniques I use. If I was looking to paint, again, a lot of miniatures really fast, get the shades down, get the highlights done in one single go, I mean, I think contrast paint kind of works in the same way that washes do, but it's just a little bit thicker, so it clings into those shadows and it settles into those cracks and crevices and creates that illusion of light really easily, a lot more easily in terms of that formulation. So it's optimized for that. But I'm not necessarily someone who says like this is the be all end all for any paint. I think that it's one tool in your toolbox. If you're using a wash glaze style painting approach, but you're intimidated, you want to try like doing something like that. If you're just afraid to paint, you just want to try something that's relatively easy. Yeah, do it. Like I don't think that they're bad by any means. I've played with some of them. I've done like fabric with them and that sort of thing. And I think that for like armor, like big bulky miniatures of the scale and stuff, I think it will work really great. I think that for Power Rangers it might work really well. I'm not convinced, and this is just personal experience, I still don't think that there is a yellow that goes on one coat perfectly ever. There's no yellow paint that does that that I've ever seen. That includes the contrast paints. I've tried it on my yellow Rangers. It works about as well as you'd expect, but I think it's a good base coat for that sort of thing, and that's where you can use it as a kind of aid in your painting process. All right, so I've got some battle damage done up. I'm gonna come out here and I'm gonna show you how to create this wash that's on my palette with just paint. So black paint. Let's do some black paint wash. And so this is a Vallejo acrylic fluid color or fluid acrylic paint. You can find this at the art store. I buy my black and whites. I think I have an ivory because I use those colors a lot. In these quantities, I have found these fluid acrylics are extremely comparable to a miniature paint. They just come in bigger bottles. And because they come in bigger bottles, you get a little bit more value out of it. Especially Vallejo. Vallejo makes model paints. The formulation's probably not that different. I'll go on a limb and say it's probably just like bottled in smaller bottles. If you find a Vallejo black, that carbon black is probably very similar in formulation to the miniature black. That's like a standard just black paint for miniatures. And so for colors that I use a lot of, black and white, I use a lot of, those are just nice, easy paints to pick up and go with. I'm going to grab, so on my wet palette, I put like this tiny, tiny drop of black paint. I'm going to put this down here and put some pile of water in. Now you can see it splashing out. That's a lot of water. I can add quite a bit of water. I'm going to take it really thin. I'm going to thin this paint out. Black paint especially, it's very intense. So you want to thin it out. And when I pull it, I kind of want it to look translucent. That's the level of wash I'm going with. If I wanted to make it sink more into the cracks and crevices, I'd probably add I'd take a drop of dish soap, put it on the corner of my palette, and then take my brush tip, touch it to the paint, and bring it into here. I'm not going to do that because I think I'm going to use this to kind of play with a little bit. I'm going to use the surface tension a little bit to try to get it to cling to certain areas on the miniature here. So I'm going to test this. Now this is a good thing to do, just generally. I'm going to test the opacity on my base. I'm liking how that's looking. I'm liking how it's drying. It goes pretty quick. Again, black paint, water. Kind of like the same as the wash we talked about at the very beginning of the stream. I'm just going to pick up that paint. I'm going to throw it in slashes here, throw it in slashes here, throw it here, into the cracks and crevices, and I'm going to let it stick out a little bit. Again, you can thin this down and put a big coat of it on and pick it up. You add a little bit of soap to it and it'll act a little bit more like the bottle washes you would get. Again, I'm a big fan of using what you have and asking a little more of your paint, playing with your paint a little bit, seeing what it's capable of doing. Be surprised. And I'm just going to throw some on into this area here. Now the nice thing is, again, when you paint the battle damage on, I'm just following the little scars that sit on the miniature area that I was painting on earlier. I took a wash onto these areas with a bigger brush and kind of outlined the strokes. But when you have like a more intense wash, and being able to mix your wash gives you an ability to adjust the intensity of it. It lets you play a little bit more and come in, give more definition to some of those scars, those battle scars on the miniature here. I've got some here. I'm going to just throw up here like that right onto the miniature. Again, not being precious, just following the battle scarring I did on the miniature before. It's a lot easier to see how it looks, and then if I want to add flourishes on top, some extra burns, if I want to make this look a little more intense and add a little more black into certain areas, I can. And I'm just gonna let that dry. So that's what that looks like close up there. Again, pretty dirty. That's fine. And you can do that. We made our own wash, so we can have fun with that. Someone in chat was talking about boxes, using takeout boxes. Great idea. Again, reusing stuff you have for hobbying. You'd be surprised what's out there, what you can leverage in your everyday life for painting. Yeah, sound effects. I like sound effects a lot. I paint, I might not talk as much when I paint by myself, but I do still do the and when I play games, I do the same thing. when I have blasts or sound effects, very Power Rangers-y actually. I like them. It makes me happy. And that's what hobbying should be about, right? Like, it should really make you happy. The process of this should always be to bring you joy. You know, you're investing the time, you're investing the effort. It shouldn't be a frustrating experience. It should be one where you kind of explore and play and be creative a little bit and just kind of zen out. So, I'm going to take some white. I'm going to clean up these areas here. Some of the areas where I thought, hey, I want to kind of brighten these up. And I might even come in here with some dry brushing too and pick up those brighter highlights. But adding the white on top here onto these shaded areas to clean this area up will give more definition to the shades and shadows I applied earlier. And again, I'm not going to be too precious about this. I'm doing this at this point kind of impressionistically in terms of like my approach. I'm not trying to do like super smooth, even like layered coats. I'm kind of, in a way, trying to replicate the art on the box where there's like these flourishes and these creative slashes, and it's not like perfectly smooth and even. It's kind of harsh and it's a little bit scratchy. And that's what I'm kind of going for here. So it doesn't have to be super perfect, especially battle damage Cyclopsis. If you're replicating something that's been battle worn, something that's like hard, it shouldn't be perfect, right? Like that's kind of the opposite of what you're trying to create in terms of the illusion. I talk about the illusion of lot. When it comes to painting miniatures, I'm of the mindset that what I'm trying to do here, I'm going to thin out this white a little bit more with some more water on my palette. What I'm trying to do here is give character to the sculpt with paint. Emphasize the model and the sculpt with paint. And that might be like nice, smooth, even coats. It might be something that has character, is dirty, is worn. You know, read the model and create that story in your head before you put the miniature, like put the brush to the miniature, because you know, having an idea of what you're going for will give you a nice kind of goal to look at and kind of help guide you in your approach in terms of what techniques you're going to apply, what you're looking to try to accomplish as you paint your miniature. So I'm just putting the white back on just to clean up a little bit and bring this model to white. So I'm going to do this across the entire miniature. I'm going to re-highlight the white because it's reading on camera, it looks a little white, but it's reading a little dark to me, and I want to bring that white out. And again, I can come back in, add more details, add another wash into the cracks and crevices if they're finding that they're being lost. But this is the part where you get to have fun. This is the part where you know, you get to zone out a little bit. It might be a little easier. You don't have to think so hard. You can just put the white on where you feel, where it looks good, where you know you want to cover up some spots. You're like, oh, I didn't like how the wash settled there. So that's all I'm gonna do, and that's fine too. So basically, in terms of battle damage, I've shown you a few techniques. I've shown you how to convert it onto your model by basically taking clippers, taking files, taking mold tools, taking pin vices to the miniature, and like modeling that damage onto the pristine surface. And yeah, that's all I did in terms of converting that stuff. In terms of painting techniques, we covered salt and hairspray, and then we covered coming in and recreating those slashes with a dark shade and then re-highlighting it up, because we created cracks and crevices for that shade to sink into. And then we bring what we can do afterwards is bring that white up to the base color that we're looking for. What do I do for Renegade Game Studios? That's an interesting question. I do a lot of stuff. My official title is Senior Marketing Manager, so I do a lot of stuff. I send emails, and I respond to emails. If you get a newsletter from Renegade Game Studios and you reply and say, hey, you know, you have a question about something in the email, it's me who's replying to it. But I also paint miniatures. I've been painting miniatures since, oh my goodness, since 2000 and I want to say like 3. And so, yeah, it's been a journey. So I made YouTube videos before I joined Renegade Game Studios, painting miniatures, and so I love doing this. This is like my fun time for me. So I'm really grateful for you joining me today. I'm so thankful we got to share a little bit of time together. I'm going to be hanging out in the Renegade Game Studios Discord channel all weekend long. www.renegadegames.com/Discord. And you can go there, join up. There's a actual Renegade Painters channel in there where you can chat along with me. You can see how progress is coming on this miniature as well as the other miniature that I'm working on. You can say hi, ask questions. I'll be there all weekend. It's my favorite part of cons, when I get to hang out and paint miniatures. That's a good weekend for me. That's a good con. For those of you who want to jump into the Renegade Painters community, I would love to see you there on Facebook. Just look for Renegade Painters. You'll find us there. If you follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, you'll see all sorts of things posted of our games. We have a lot of stuff going on this whole weekend, so head over to Renegade Game Studios website to see what's going on. You'll find a schedule of all the events we're doing, including demos of a bunch of great games, and you'll also get the time for my main stage painting session on Sunday, where I'm going to be taking on Mega Gold Art. I've got, I'll give you a little bit of a preview. Right there. This is another big model. I have a thing for big models. So, yeah. You can find us all over. Just do a search. And yeah, thank you so much for joining me. I am so glad we got a chance to paint together. I hope you have a wonderful Gen Con and a great weekend. Until next time, painters, renegades, play your game. Thanks for watching.